Some opening shot thoughts tonight. The more new video comes out, the more it casts doubt on the specifics of the Department of Homeland Security narrative around what took place in Franklin Park nearly 2 weeks ago. That's when an ICE agent shot and killed suspected undocumented Gonzalez after a traffic stop went bad. DHS immediately claimed that Gonzalez resisted arrest and dragged an ICE agent while trying to speed away. DHS said then the agent was seriously injured and shot Villegas Gonzalez for fear of his life. The agent was then taken to the hospital in stable condition. Now, first, from a nearby auto body shop which caught Gonzalez's car in traffic next to the truck he would eventually crash into. 30 seconds later on this video, you hear gunshots on this tape, meaning the entire ICE encounter, attempted getaway and shooting, happened in less than half a minute. Then another surveillance tape from a nail salon, which we were not able to broadcast, but it did not show an ICE officer being dragged. Either the officer was off camera or it simply didn't happen. And yesterday, the Chicago Sun-Times was the first to report on Franklin Park police body cam footage showing the suspected ICE officer downplaying his injuries, essentially saying they were no big deal.
Just a left knee injury and some lacerations with staples. Nothing major.
Now, the FBI is purportedly investigating, but given its shaky current leadership, it's hard to have confidence that a full accounting will ever be made public. And there are so many questions still to be answered. Why did ICE agents target Gonzalez in a traffic stop on a busy thoroughfare right during the morning rush? And what exactly happened during this encounter that caused it to go so bad so quickly? Was an ICE agent really in danger for their life before they shot and killed Rodriguez? We know that an officer-involved shooting in Chicago receives the utmost scrutiny. COPA immediately investigates and police body cam footage is released to the public. And that's thanks to reforms that happened after the fatal shooting of Laquan McDonald. But no such regulations exist among DHS's federal police force. And there are significant questions raised as to the training these officers are receiving and the tactics they are using, both in Broadview and in what happened in Franklin Park. We will keep seeking answers. Tonight, President Trump changes his tune on Ukraine. Will it change the trajectory of the war? Chicago City Council tees up a vote on granny flats after a last-minute compromise. And how to change Chicago's image to the world as a violent, lawless city. Welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Schutz. President Trump had incendiary words for the United Nations and several allied countries yesterday. But beyond the fog of that came a possible policy shift in support of Ukraine. Trump now says he believes Ukraine could win its war against Russia without conceding territory. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had some stark warnings for the global community.
It depends on you. Whether you help peace or continue trading with Russia and helping Russia to fund this war, it depends on you. Whether prisoners of war will be freed, whether abducted children will come home, whether hostages will be free. It depends on you. What will define existence? War like now, or our joint strong actions as it should be?
And joining me now is Paul Post, a senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, also a professor of international relations at the University of Chicago. Professor Post, thanks for speaking with us. I'm sure you watched with great interest what happened yesterday. Criticism of the UN is nothing new, but these comments seem to take it to a new level. Does it lend you to believe that perhaps the U.S. is souring on the organization and might pull out or might weaken it?
So first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And to go directly to your question, I don't think this points to the United States pulling out of the UN. What has been happening is the Trump administration has been withdrawing some of the donations that it makes to the UN. It is not giving members of the United Nations have to pay dues to the UN. That's how it funds itself. The U.S. has historically been the largest payer of those dues. They have been pulling back those payments. They still do offer some payments. And what he did lay out in his speech yesterday was, in his own way, a rationale for that, basically saying that he thinks there's a lot of inefficiency at the UN and that also the UN is largely ineffective. And what I mean by he did it in his own way was he brought up a narrative about when he bid on renovating the UN and about how the UN ended up going with a different contractor and had much higher costs than what was necessary. And then he even said, this is a microcosm. He didn't use that phrase, but he said, this is a small example of a much larger problem, which is inefficiencies at the UN. So he did say the UN has a lot of promise, but he says the UN is very inefficient and the UN is very ineffective as it's currently operating.
And maybe encapsulated by that issue with the escalator the other day, which he seems to be still looking into. And we're looking at some images of the Ukrainian president right now. You saw that the president in a social media post yesterday now says Ukraine can win the war, he believes, without territorial concessions. In the past, he had seemed to be adamant that Ukraine was going to have to cede some territory. Do you think that shift in position is meaningful?
I mean, this is absolutely the first time that President Trump has made a statement like this. I mean, if you look at the evolution that he's gone through since when he was a candidate, and he was a candidate, the first thing he was saying was the U.S. shouldn't be supporting Ukraine at all. Then he eventually changed his tone to saying, well, maybe we can offer loans to Ukraine, but we'll be paid back. Then he even said, of course, I'll end this war in a day. And what we've gradually seen is he's adjusted and adjusted and adjusted to where, okay, the U.S. will continue to support, but we want to have, say, the mineral deal as a way of paying back the United States. And then eventually saying, well, we're not going to give as much aid directly to Ukraine, but we are going to give it to NATO, who, of course, can then give it to Ukraine. So he's been going gradually and gradually through these ways of kind of saying, I'm not fully sold on Ukraine, but I'm going to continue to support them. So to now suddenly see him say, actually, I think Ukraine can win, that is a very big shift. And the question is, what has led to that? Has that been a matter of Zelensky with his diplomacy? Zelensky has done a great job of continuing to engage with Trump. I've said this for a while, that Trump is someone who tends to do the last thing he heard from someone in the room. And Zelensky has done a great job of always being the last person in the room. And so I wonder if those efforts are starting to pay off. And Trump is now starting to believe the kind of information that he's receiving from Zelensky, that he's receiving from NATO allies, to say, actually, the situation is not as dire and that Ukraine is actually in a position to not just hold, but actually regain territory.
And it's an interesting strategy. And it also seems that the president has been transactional in this decision making. So perhaps Zelensky making the case, hey, this is what's in it for the U.S. here if you fully back us in NATO. But speaking of NATO, we see these possible incursions by Russia into NATO airspace, either with drones or other phenomena. Do you view that as saber rattling, and is the U.S. and NATO prepared to counter this?
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see the escalation, if you will, of drone incursions by Russia into, of course, Polish airspace, Romanian airspace, now apparently Denmark as well, and then, of course, Russian jets moving into Estonian airspace. And the question is, what are they trying to do? This has led these allies to actually invoke Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Article 4 is not the mutual defense provision. That's Article 5. That's the one most people talk about. Article 4 is about consultation when there's a crisis, and that's exactly what's happened. That was invoked by both Estonia and Poland. That has led the NATO allies to adjust, meaning moving forces, anti-aircraft platforms, as well as, say, AWACS and different types of, again, anti-air platforms to those countries as a show of support. I think that's very necessary because it's hard to say exactly what Russia's trying to do, but they're definitely testing. Because what's important is Russia has not launched attacks through these incursions, but it's definitely been the case that they've been testing kind of what NATO is going to do. The question is, why are they doing this now? It's not completely clear exactly what they're doing now. It could even have been a way to kind of see, what would Trump do? What would the Trump administration do? And that is why I think it's very notable that the members of the Trump administration have said in the past few days, including Mike Waltz, said, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Right. So I think that might be the answer that Putin was looking for, and it's a very strong answer. You combine that with now what Trump's saying about Zelensky, and it really does show kind of a 180 by Trump.
All right, kind of a global game of chess here. Professor Paul Post of the Chicago Council and University of Chicago, thanks very much for your insight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And up next, the battle over legalizing granny flats hits a milestone right when we come back.